Introducing Chronopunk, a story about a man who gets sent back in time to prevent the Federal Reserve to monetize debt. Specifically, Moody, the main character of the story, gets sent back from the 2060s back into 2006 to prepare for a lawsuit that he's going to file against Ben Bernanke and the Federal Reserve, who start quantitative easing in 2009. So the story is a fictional science fiction story, of course, about this man who gets sent back. But there is some real events that are mixed into the science fiction story, such as the 2008 financial crisis, other events that are mentioned in the story are real. Ben Bernanke, of course, is real. But then the rest is science fiction, and of course every character and every allusion to a character is all completely not intentional. So the purpose of this story, let me give a little bit of a background of the story and how I intend to roll this out going forward. So the story is roughly finished and written. I'm pretty happy with the way it's looking. I'm working on the last finesse. And of course all the editing and language stuff that needs to be done. The way I intend to go forward with the publication of this story is I want to do it in a series. So it's a little bit old-fashioned, like in the old days when people published fragments of novels in magazines or newspapers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to publish it on Substack and also have brief introductions and explanations about the published parts in podcast form. So the idea is to kind of slowly approach the publication of the story into segments, parts that hopefully are coherent. The story wasn't written in parts or chapters or anything like that. The story was written in a flow, and then subsequently I segmented the parts. So I hope that there's a bit of coherence in terms of how I publish these. But again, it wasn't designed like that. So there could be some overlaps, there could be some holes and things like that. But overall, the story is, in this particular episode, I want to give a synopsis of the story, the purpose of the story, and what I'm trying to hopefully achieve with it. So the way this came about is I was thinking to myself for the last decade or so how to approach this problem of the Federal Reserve and the money printing of the United States and the ballooning deficits. Now, fortunately, in the last couple of months, there's been some dramatic changes in US policy. We have Doge, we have President Trump, we have Elon Musk going after the waste and the fraud in the US government, which is great, and we applaud that. However, the main problem that we see is still not solved, and hopefully the story can help mitigate that problem, and that is the freewheeling Federal Reserve. We need to rein in on the Federal Reserve and its money printing tendencies. This story is heavily leaned on the idea of the Terminator, of course, where somebody from the future gets sent back in order to prevent an event from happening, an event that has subsequent negative consequences on the society that lives in the future. So that's borrowed from Terminator. I want to put this up front, and I'm very happy with that. I don't have a problem with I'm a big fan of the idea of the Terminator. Now, let me give a brief synopsis of the story, and I want to talk about the physics here, because I actually I'm a big fan of quantum physics. As a layman, I'm not a physicist per training, but I read a lot about the idea of time travel. I've read David Deutsch's books, in particular Fabric of Reality and The Beginning of Infinity. So I have a little bit of a let's say a bit of a more serious approach towards time travel than maybe a pure science fiction writer. But again, I'm taking the liberty as a science fiction writer to come up with imagination and leave the details unsolved in this particular case. For example, the paradox of coming back from the future and changing the past, you cannot, that is an inconsistency in itself. So the answer, of course, to that is that you cannot come back from your future, but you can come back from another future and influence the past and then change the trajectory of that past into another future. I'm a adherent to the multiverse interpretation of quantum mechanics, and that kind of makes sense in that context. But here's the synopsis of the story. So Moody, the main character, gets sent back. The story starts with him actually being sent back in 2006 and follows Moody throughout his establishing a foothold in this time that is before he was even born. So Moody's born in the sort of 2030s, and he's now sent back to 2006. Then the story goes back and forth between now and now. Now is 2006 and now is 2064. So there's two nows in the story. One, again, is the one where we're sending Moody back. So the present from where we're sending Moody back, and then there's the present that Moody is actually sent back to. So it goes back and forth. In other words, there's a story that Moody that explains how Moody got to where he actually ends up being chosen for this project. And then there's also, I hope I've done a decent job in narrative building, character building. Moody has a lover, girlfriend, boss, Lisa. They have a background. Their backgrounds are depicted, explained. There's some drama there. There's some action, a lot of drama. There's a love story involved. We go back to the parents of both of these characters. So hopefully, I personally like that a lot when people are, when characters are built throughout their history, because that's the best way to understand people. There's also a parallel story of Moody actually now living in 2006 and going towards the lawsuit, and that is also an interesting story, and there's also character buildings there. Again, we go back to people's pasts and try to approach them from their pasts and hopefully paint a picture of who they are and what their characters are. Eventually, the story culminates in the lawsuit. There is a little bit of legalish and a little bit of maybe almost a court drama here. And then the story ends with a twist. And I want to leave it at that. There's a twist here, something that I think makes a lot of sense, is interesting and inspiring. So that's roughly the story. I don't want to give away more than that. I hope readers and listeners can enjoy the story. It's an entertaining story. It's an action-packed love story with philosophical and physical, physics, deep questions of philosophy and physics interwoven into an action-packed love story. That's what this is. So I've tried to question also some scientific, open some scientific questions, such as, for example, what does it mean to, what does it actually mean to travel through time? What does that concept actually mean in terms of physics? And the answer, like I said, is going to have to be something along the lines of different trajectories of multiverses. There's philosophical questions, such as, for example, the byline of the beginning of the story. It's a line that I borrowed from Rage Against the Machine. Who controls the past now? Controls the future. Who controls the present now? Controls the past. Those lines, it's written in the beginning of the story. That is actually much more prevalent right now than one might think, because we just had some incidents recently with Google and their Gemini models that have been trained to describe the United States history, and that history that they describe is completely wrong because it was influenced by diversity politics and things along, identity politics and all that nonsense, and that's very dangerous, because when you start describing the past in your terms, you're controlling the present, and you might also control the future, and that is very dangerous. That is very dangerous. The Soviets did that. The Chinese under Mao did that. That doesn't end up well. So this is a serious issue in its own right, and it's being discussed in the story. There's a scene in the story where politicians and operators are discussing whether this is even a good idea. Let's assume we have the technology to send Moody back in time to actually change something. Is that really a good thing? And what if everybody now starts acting in a way that, well, if we don't do well, we can just go back in time and change it, right? So there's a bit of a moral hazard there, or the mother of all moral hazards, which is we can just undo our past, and therefore we don't really care what we do. So those are, again, I think, philosophical questions that are worth being at least asked. The story offers some answers, but this is not the kind of novel that is hopeful. I mean, there's definitely no lecturing here. There's no. I'm trying to be a writer in the sense that I let the character speak for myself. What my personal opinions are, they are what they are. I'm happy to share them, but the story does not necessarily reflect my opinion. In this particular case, I'm not even sure it's a good idea to send people back in time to fix problems. There's another interesting scene in the book where the question of money printing and the Federal Reserve is being raised. Now, that happens to be my personal opinion. I think for frequent listeners of the Not Even Wrong podcast, this won't be a surprise that I'm very skeptical of the Federal Reserve. I'm on board with Ron Paul here. We need to at least audit the Federal Reserve, and ideally we should abolish the Federal Reserve and have rule-based money, something like Bitcoin, because that is the fairest, best way for everybody. That is the most social way. Money is a social construct. Money is a software that allocates labor towards resources. Labor in many ways, not just physical labor, but intellectual labor. Any kind of human product, any kind of productive activity humans do gets allocated through money. And if we control money, then we have control over that, and that ends up not being a good thing. So if we can have rule-based, uncontrolled, decentralized money, that has the best outcome for society. And that is my opinion, and that is part of the opinion in this book. There are other characters in the book who share different opinions, and I tried to be as honest about this as I can without spoiling my own thoughts. In other words, it's not so easy for an author to what's the word, to steelman arguments, particularly not when you're really strong on one side of the whole conversation. So I just want to put that out there. So the purpose of this, the purpose of the story is really to inspire people to talk about this. In particular now, I started writing this about 1.5 years ago. So this was way before Doge and Musk and Trump. Oh, my thoughts were that there is no salvaging of the United States and the Western values of the free world, because by wasting all this money through the printing press, I echo Niall Ferguson's talk recently, I think it was in Australia, where he spoke about the problem with a soft budget liberal democracy that really eats itself from the inside. So soft budgets are dangerous, and we can see it in the numbers. Trillions of deficits, trillions upon trillions of debt. That is not sustainable, and that will destroy this country and with the United States, the free world. We have a solution. I think Doge is a path towards a solution, but I think the discussion is still relevant, right? The discussion of the Federal Reserve and the unhinged monetization of debt. Monetization of debt means that the Treasury can issue debt and it's being bought by the Federal Reserve, and as long as the currency doesn't collapse, this can go on. And this is one of those things like taking drugs or whatever analogy you like. It feels good until it doesn't, and at some point the body collapses and you die on an overdose. This is exactly what happens to an economy if money printing is unhinged. So, having said that, now the purpose of the story is to open a discussion. Hopefully, I can have this discussion in one forum or the other. I haven't thought about this too deeply. So the way this is going to be published now, let me talk a little bit about the logistics. This is the intro here, and the intro will just have a synopsis attached to it. And then every time I'm gonna talk about parts of the story, I'm gonna publish those parts, so they're gonna be available with no charge for reading. There is hopefully at some point going to be a book published in paperback and electronic form and all of these things, maybe an audiobook too. That's not in the books right now. Right now, this is what I intend to do. I also tend to illustrate the book with images and maybe videos. So this is hopefully going to be a multimedia endeavor. The goal is to be as entertaining as possible. I think the story offers enough entertainment for people to read, even if you're not obsessed about government finance. I absolutely don't want this to be a government finance story or something like that. The book can be written in a lecture format at university, but it can also be just read as a fun read. Again, it's an action-packed love story interwoven with questions of philosophy and finance and politics and physics. So there is hopefully some interesting points to start with, to have conversations about, and the goal is really to have a more broader conversation about the reasons why we have a Federal Reserve and the dangers of the Federal Reserve as it is now, and the particular moment in time when Ben Bernanke in 2009 started to do quantitative easing. That is, in my opinion, was the beginning of the end of free market liberal democracy that we at least thought we were living in until then. I thought about this even back then. This isn't a new revelation. It's just that now, particularly post-COVID, in the Biden administration, when the trillions of deficits started piling up and when the society started derailing with woke, and we had Black Lives Matter, which turned from a, I believe, good cause into a total charade, and many other programs like that turned into charades. We are remedying some of that right now, but nevertheless, the conversation is worth having. I think I don't want to now jump the gun and come up with recipes such as, abolish the Fed or things like that, because that is a bit of a complex question. Abolishing the Fed could be similar to maybe if you have a bad heart and you just take the heart out of the body, then the body dies. So you have to be a little bit careful about that. But again, having the conversation, that is the main goal of the story. Hopefully it can achieve that. And well, enjoy. Thank you.